Today's event will be led by Chris Herndon and Olivia Boischinger. Chris is a senior planner on the Metropolitan Council's Housing and Livable Communities team. With over 15 years of experience in real estate development, risk management, and an MBA grounded in systems thinking, he specializes in analyzing complex housing policy scenarios and developing practical solutions across the Twin Cities region. Olivia is a senior planner on the Metropolitan Council's Housing and Livable Communities team. She co-authored the 2050 Housing Policy Plan as part of Imagine 2050, leads review of comprehensive plan amendments for housing policy consistency, and is currently developing an affordable housing policy toolkit for communities across the region. Prior to joining the council, she held planning roles in Brooklyn Center and North St. Paul. So I'll now turn it over to Chris and Olivia. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Good morning, folks. Glad to see some familiar names in this space. So we got a mix of cities, counties, and consultants here. And, this is, I think, going to be a timely presentation. Really, what are the grant opportunities that Met Council has available for any of your policy, affordable housing programs, zoning changes, and the like. Especially important as we enter into a comprehensive planning cycle, which many of you are already familiar with our grants. And so let's just jump right in. So we're going to talk at a high level about the grant opportunities and the Livable Communities grant offering. And then we're going to do a little bit deeper dive into the policy and program development grant specifically. Then we'll do a city spotlight. Shout out to Richfield for participating. And then we'll get into some discussion, right? We often hear that, cities want to hear what other cities are doing in their communities and what they're advancing, what they're prioritizing, how they're overcoming barriers. And so that will be the bulk of our discussion today. So look forward to, seeing some of you come off and join into the discussion, but also knowing that, the chat is available for participation as well. Then we'll talk about, what's next. We'll wrap it up and let you go about your day.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. And so as Chris mentioned, I want to start us off just by discussing some of the current funding opportunities that Met Council does have to offer and support this policy and affordable housing program development. I took a peek at who's in the room, and so this may be familiar to some of you. However, the Livable Communities program has undergone some changes and updates for this year that I just want to make sure we highlight as well. Next slide, there we go. So as I mentioned, I think most folks are familiar with Livable Communities, but for those that aren't or haven't engaged with the programs in a while, I just want to give a brief refresher. So the version of the grants that you will see and we'll talk about today is really here in due to feedback and input that we've heard from folks like you all over the past few years as we underwent these extensive program changes. So we wouldn't have been able to make these shifts without engaged regional partners like you all. So the Livable Communities programs, the whole breadth of programs is shaped by the goals identified in Met Council's Regional Development Guide, Imagine 2050, which was adopted roughly this time last year. The main goals that are present throughout all of our grant programs include increasing housing choice, improving dignity and safety in our communities, and ensuring all households in the region can meet their needs locally. Each program has maybe additional and more specific goals or priorities, but I just wanted to highlight those. Next slide, please. So Livable Communities grants, I would say, are most often known, or many people engage with us for locally for supporting development projects and development activities. Starting in 2022, we did begin funding policy development through a new program. We continue to offer the policy development grant and have since been able to expand it to support affordable housing program development as well. Specifics on that grant will be covered shortly by Chris. And I just want to add briefly that new this year for 2026, Livable Communities now has a grant program that supports small area planning for communities and counties. As is stated, many folks on this call may be familiar with this, again, wanting to point out some updates this year. So for all livable community grants, including the policy and affordable housing program development, cities must be enrolled in the Livable Communities program. With a quick maybe thumbs up in the chat, who here is a participating city or county? Awesome. Cool. Okay. And for those that are not, hoping you'll be able to learn more and be able to connect with Chris and I after this conversation to be able to learn more and either determine if you are enrolled or get enrolled with us. Our website now includes a way to check your city's status at any time. So you'll see a screen grab here on the slide. You can see if any requirements are missing, or could put you in contact with a member of our team if you want to discuss enrollments or any of the requirements there. For any prospective developers, consultants, or other types of partners, this tool may also be helpful and provide a quick way to reference that if you're looking to work with a community, you can see their status at any time. Specific for the policy and affordable housing program development grants, eligible uses for the funds must be used to support staff or consultant time spent directly on the development of the policy or program that's identified in the grant. So each application has a maximum request of $100,000. This is one of the changes you'll see is increased from $50,000 in previous years. The deliverable is expected for the grant must result in a policy, ordinance, or program that is presented by adoption to your regulatory body. Most often this is city councils. It could be an HRA, EDA, or a county board. We fully understand staff cannot, like that adoption cannot be guaranteed. Therefore, the completed deliverable must be presented to council for potential adoption. And I just want to highlight that any like local government jurisdiction that mentioned can apply. So that includes cities, counties, HRAs, CDAs, as long as they are an enrolled participant. So where would folks go from here if this is of interest? As mentioned, Chris will be discussing the specifics around the policy and affordable housing program development grant shortly, sharing those outcomes and what important examples are. But the process for getting started is, again, taking a peek and confirming your community's eligibility, building your team, whether that's all internal staff time or working on the process of procuring a consultant. Create and submit an application, and then if awarded, advance the project and get going on the work, which is pretty exciting. So kind of next steps for anybody that is interested, we encourage you to meet with a program coordinator to discuss any project ideas. We can meet with you at any time to just talk through if something would fit or be an eligible use, provide some guidance on the actual application process itself, and ideally just be a resource in whatever way is possible. One of the things changing this year, and for any folks that have been familiar with livable communities, is we have moved on from web grants as our online grant application software and are transitioning to a software called Flux. We know there's a learning curve for everyone, staff here included, and so we have created a training webinar on how to use the new grant application platform. We have office hours available to walk through specific questions, or we're available by email or call if there's ever any questions with this new system. It is created to be as streamlined as possible and a much more intuitive process than web grants was. But we also know that there's always challenges when changes come up with the software that's being used. And again, specific to the grants, these policy and program development grants are reimbursement based, and like our other grant programs, are a 3-year grant term with the potential for extension if needed. Some key dates to go through. We are, as you can see by the slide, the 2026 grant cycle is underway. The first round of applications opened a little over a week ago and are closing on April 15th. So all of this information that's being shared today and even more detail can be found in the notice of funding available that was published earlier in February and is available on our website. There will be a second round of grants available later this year, opening mid-September and closing on October 15th.
Awesome. Thanks, Olivia.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit more on the policy and program development grant itself. There's four, main outcomes that we're trying to accomplish here. And the more that your project aligns with these outcomes, the higher it's going to score, right? We assume this is going to be competitive. And so just to quickly overview them, first one is more affordable housing, preservation, development, rental ownership. Number two is environmentally sustainable development and green infrastructure. So just continuing to make efforts there. Preventing any displacement is number three. Keeping those residents and businesses, in the community rather than pushing them out because of a project. And increasing housing choice, right? Like whether that's expanding to missing middle housing types, ADUs, et cetera. Just creating more options for residents in your community, in your city, and across the region. You guys know your community better than anybody else. You know the issues, you know what is top of mind for folks. You talk about this amongst your colleagues. So you likely might already have ideas in terms of like what you maybe want to submit for, as an application. These are just some examples to get those juices flowing, because also, we've been on calls with folks having those meetings, and people don't quite know yet what they want to do or what they want to apply for. So whether that is, amending zoning code, again, very timely as you're looking at the comprehensive planning process. Maybe you need to establish a TIF policy because you're thinking about other ways to fund projects in your community. Another common thing is, especially at this stage, is a housing study, housing needs analysis, or it could be something as simple as like, we need to reduce parking minimums in our community, right, to encourage more development, to make things maybe pencil out a little bit better for developers, so we can, again, address the housing needs. A pretty hot topic, right, is ADUs and missing middle housing policies, like seeing more options, again, available in the marketplace. A lot of cities have received LAHA funds, right? So thinking about like, how do we want to use these funds? Are there some new programs that we want to create inside of our city? Or maybe it's time to revise, an inclusionary zoning policy, or even, again, like, something you might already have in place, like an affordable housing policy. Like now is a good time to start thinking about those ideas. All right, so we want to talk about Richfield because they are currently working on a project. They were awarded actually a grant in 2024 and 2025. And so I have Julie Urban with us to not so much talk about the projects themselves, even though we are going to do a little bit of overview of that, but to talk more about like the process that Julie and her team went through to gear up for applying for the grant. Again, like there might be some folks on this call that have never applied before, and so like where do you start, right? If it can feel like a lot, especially if you're just a one individual compared to those cities that might have a bigger team. So Julie, could you go ahead and please introduce yourself and your role at the city, and then just maybe a high level of these two projects, right? 2024 and then the one in 2025, and then we'll get into kind of an interview style discussion.
Great, thanks. So I'm Julie Urban. I'm the Assistant Community Development Director for the City of Richfield. I've been at Richfield for longer than I can keep track of anymore in a variety of roles. And right now I lead our ownership and rental housing teams. I work on housing policy, and I project manage housing redevelopment projects. So I am not as familiar with the 2024 project. That is a planning piece where we took a look at our multifamily zoning districts, which were created actually back in like late 70s, early 80s. They hadn't really been used for any actual development because most multifamily development in Richfield happened in the 60s. But so it was a part of the last comp plan process that identified that there are places in our code that we'd like to have redone. And the grant just allowed an opportunity to hire a consultant to work on that because it's just really difficult to do that kind of work in any meaningful way when you're also doing regular planning work. So we were able to hire a consultant with that grant and do kind of a cool engagement process and basically rewrite our multifamily zoning codes. So that's the most I know about that. I can certainly clue people into Sam, our planner, who worked on that more specifically. The housing program development grant that we got and I was more involved with, that sort of came about. It was kind of a cool coincidental process, but we had been looking at our housing programs internally, in part because of the changing funding landscape. We no longer receive community development block grant funds directly. The county now has control of all those funds and you have to apply competitively for that. So we sort of lost a source of ongoing revenue there. But then we also at the same time gained LAHA funds. And so trying to figure out what to do with those funds. We also have a very large waiting list for housing rehab, the one and only housing rehab program for low-income homeowners. And there's a long waiting list and we just see a bunch of needs. And so all that kind of came together and we said, let's take a comprehensive look at our housing programs, many of which have been around for a long time. Maybe it's time for a refresh or to make some changes. And so we did an evaluation of the programs, a formal evaluation. We spent about 8 months on that. And we brought that to our Housing and Redevelopment Authority and sort of talked to them about opportunities and need for changes and came up with a plan that we would follow the next 1 to 2 years. And that came about last June. And at the same time, I was in some sort of I think it was a ULI regional housing meeting, and Met Council presented and said, oh, by the way, our policy development grant can now support program development. And I thought, maybe we could use some of those funds to help us to carry out this evaluation that we just completed. So it was just really great timing. The other sort of unique thing about us is that we have a housing specialist position that's a job share, so held by 2 part-time people, and they both were interested and willing to add hours. And so we were able to basically fund an internal consultant rather than going outside. And so I think it's a more efficient process for us, and they're able to set aside very specific time during the week to work on program development. So that is kind of our story. And and in terms of one of the questions Chris and Olivia asked is to talk about, how did we build support? And I think that's with working with our HRA sort of throughout the process. And, it made it an easy sell for them. So that was easy. In terms of anything we would have done differently, I think, it was all, again, just all kind of worked out just the way it was supposed to. Applying for the grant, Met Council makes it quite easy, really. It's not a challenging grant application. They're always super helpful and accessible and really appreciate that. And then once you get a grant, Kelly and others are just great at answering questions and making sure that you can figure out how to access the funds. So I think if I covered everything or is there anything I missed, let me know.
I think that's good. I think there's some important points in there. I just want to reiterate, right? It started with a need, right? A priority, something that you've been hearing and been thinking about for some time. And then you started thinking about okay, who is the team that we're going to pull together here involving the HRA and, thinking about some of those part-time staff members. And instead of going outside, you ended up going inside and kind of then advancing towards the application, from that point. So and even just becoming aware that like now this grant, like we can support the planning around program development. I think that's a new piece, a new component to this grant that is new, right? And so now it's like, okay, cities be thinking about, okay, like, are there some programs that we want to start thinking about? One of the challenges that we hear is some smaller cities facing is like, okay, if a developer is unable to provide the type of supportive services that might be needed in a affordable housing development or mixed development, they oftentimes will come to the city, like, what kind of services do you have available? And so, this is maybe an opportunity to start thinking about, okay, how might we stand up some programs? Maybe that's in partnership with some other small cities or connecting with your county to see if there's opportunity there. So Julie, this is great. I appreciate you walking us through that. Just want to open it up real quick, maybe a couple questions if folks have related to like the process that Julie and her team went through to kind of get towards applying. Are there any questions or even comments, reactions to Julie and Richfield? Cool. All right. We will keep chugging along. Thanks again, Julie. I appreciate it. So now we're going to get into, I think, to me, which feels like one of the exciting parts of our conversation today, and it's really about you guys sharing, right? You guys learning from each other, you guys hearing what other cities are working on, and maybe there's opportunities for networking that emerge from this. So, as we open it up, please do, use the hand raise function if you want to share something, or feel free, if we're asking questions, to just use the chat. We'll be monitoring that as well. Again, maybe this sparks new ideas, maybe more questions. Again, we are here, I think, not just Met Council, but collectively to support, these outcomes across the region. I think it's exciting times. So what I want to start off with, what are your city's number one? What's your city's number one housing challenge right now? Thinking about priorities, things that you might continuously hear from the community, in city council discussions, planning commissions, or even like your staff, the conversations you're having with your colleagues. What is the biggest challenge that you're facing from a housing perspective right now?
And Chris, we do have a question in the chat from Andrew Boucher. For the 5 criteria, LGAH and comp plan housing element consistent with Met Council policies, fair housing policy, completion of annual housing action plan, and ALHOA spending. If there are 1 or 2 of these criteria missing, how does that affect potential applications? And then I'll move on to Jake's question after that.
Yeah. I'll jump in quickly. Thank you, Andrew, for the question. I'll give a brief overview here, and also please know that would be happy to dive in more with individual communities, because sometimes the reaching the solution can be a larger conversation. So there are certain eligibility requirements like the LGAH, the Land Guided for Affordable Housing, and comp plan consistency that would impact a community's ability to apply. So we would need to meet and work with staff to make sure that we can kind of rectify those eligibility requirements to put an application in. Things like the fair housing policy and completion of the housing action plan, for example, are eligibility requirements. We are able to receive, or a city could apply, those elements must be completed or rectified before a community is able to draw down or access the funds from a grant. Knowing that those particularly adopting a fair housing policy can take a little bit more time to bring to council and those things, we have a little bit more flexibility in that it won't hinder the application process, but would need to be completed in time of drawing down funds. And again, I would be more than happy to meet individually with communities that want to work towards consistency or becoming eligible to apply.
Oh, Chris, I think you're muted.
Andrew, does that answer your question?
Yep, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Awesome. So if you have it, others likely have it, but it can be more nuanced. So definitely schedule time to continue that conversation. So just looking at the chat, right? So Jake, I know in Arden Hills, cost burden seniors and insufficient mix of housing types. Right? NOAA preservation, right? I see that come up here a couple of times, one from Kara and one from Max making that point. Not enough deeply affordable housing, 30% AMI level, or even homeownership opportunities. Makes sense. Yeah, maintaining affordability, preserving that affordability, aging housing stock. Gosh, yeah, I live in an older home, and just thinking about the cost to do that, like if you're already strapped for cash, like that can be a hard thing to do. So certainly relate to that. Stephanie says diminishing supply of more affordable ownership opportunities. That's real. Manufactured home affordability and home condition. That's perfect. New housing stock, right? So that's your community might already be completely built out, or it might not be. So there could be a lot more room for new development. And so how do you be intentional about that? To see how that's a big priority. Now, I'm curious for those of you, I mean, as you look through the chat and you're just hearing some of those ideas, how many folks, just maybe by show of thumbs up, feel like they've also addressed one of these issues or one of these priorities? Like, and there may be like have already taken some actions in addressing NOAA preservation, for example, or really again anything that we're talking about. So Max has advanced something. I'm curious, Max, like which one you guys feel that you've been able to advance? And I asked that because you could be those of you that have maybe advanced some of these things, you could be a potential resource for those that are kind of just starting off on like, how do we tackle this? So feel free to name that thing or not. It's totally up to you. So now, like, begin with the ideal outcome in mind, right? So as we start to think about some potential solutions to these priorities or these challenges that your community is facing, what are you considering as a potential solution? Or let's start there. Like, what have you thought about from a policy or program perspective that could be a potential solution to the priorities you've identified? Is it policy? Is it ordinance? Is it a program? Is it something else? Maybe it's a study and just trying to learn more. Okay, Julie, I like that, right? Cooperative ownership. Seeing a lot more of that across the region, across the country, actually. So that's a big deal. And the solutions don't have to already be in place, right? Like it's just like, what are you thinking about as ideas that you have? Might be as simple as a policy or a program. Okay, Northco as a potential partner in that effort, Julie, that's good. Naming resources, right? Resource sharing. I think that's really important. So I guess what maybe I'm seeing is, let's address this real quick. So I'm hopeful our council will be adopting our missing middle housing ordinance on Monday. All right. But the big question, the thing that we haven't solved is the question of how developers will still be able to build that kind of housing, hopefully addressing the zoning code issues. But there is building code issues, financing challenges, et cetera. That's a great point, right? So policy and ordinance is one big piece of the puzzle. And then there's some other things that also fall in line. So I want to come back to you, Dakota, on this. I'll have a follow-up question for you in a second. Jake, solution-wise, talking about zoning code overhaul to reduce time to market, housing gap need, market study to see where the opportunities are, modular construction. Yeah, there's something there, right? And how does your city have a policy on it? Does it just fall in line with the building code? Is there something else? Maybe there's a program related to that, and how do you create more opportunities for that type of housing to be built in your community? Trying to pass an inclusionary housing ordinance. Okay. Yep, these are great examples of potential solutions. Yeah, and it's okay to not have an idea yet, right? It's like there's a lot of options that things we could do. It's a matter of like also thinking through like what is the potential most impactful thing that we could do at this point. Lobby the state for more rational what is MF building code? I don't know what that multifamily. Thank you. So multifamily building code. I could go on about that. Yeah, Jake. Yeah. Like that reaction, Elizabeth. That's right. Like, do you have a manufactured home community in your city? Again, there's some folks that might be interested in that and creating some different ownership structures. Julie Urban, I'm volunteering you for being a resource for folks. The other piece I want to ask about, and this is kind of I think getting to the point that Dakota put in the chat. It's like what would actually get in the way though of successful implementation of this policy or program? That's right. You've identified the problem, right? The priority, the thing that you want to solve. You've come up with some potential solutions, and you maybe have even advanced a solution, right? Like missing middle housing ordinance is going to council on Monday, right? So what would get in the way of that ordinance not necessarily being approved, but actually resulting in the impact that you want to have, which is more missing middle housing being built in your community, right? Expanding housing choice for people, creating different price points, for people to enter into the market, right? That's what you want to see. And so to Dakota's point, there's building code, there's financing challenges, right? Thinking through some of those other potential things. And the reason I ask this is because is there an opportunity to think about some of those barriers and then come all the way back to, the problem that you're trying to solve? And is that a part of the strategy, right? Is that a part of how you're trying to solve this? So it's not just zoning code, it's something else. Or maybe you hear this being a common thread amongst and across different cities and across other counties, and you're thinking, gosh, like, could we do something bigger here? Could we put together a coalition maybe to tackle the building code question? Or do we reach out to a number of regional banks, lenders that, hey, look, we have a policy to match this, but maybe there's something from a financial product that we need to support this type of development to happen in our community. It can be even potentially some bigger strategies or bigger projects that you undertake, maybe not just for your city, but maybe something bigger. So Jake's saying that Elizabeth has experience, what a lot of us have gone through. Okay. Yeah, I'm curious, like what are some of the other bigger barriers? I mean, Dakota, you were kind of naming some of them that you could, run into even beyond, making some zoning updates.
Yeah, sorry, I just put it in the chat too, but one that I kind of failed to mention that's like really kind of critical in Bloomington right now is the kind of infrastructure capacity question around kind of water, sewer. many parts of our neighborhoods were designed back in the day when it was planned for single family homes, and now our infill development is seeing duplexes and, trying to become more dense and efficient with land use and kind of create some barriers around just the physical infrastructure capacity.
Yeah, that's a big one. So was that a part of your guys' initial discussion? I'm just out of curiosity, or, as we want to advance zoning policy, et cetera, but we know that this is going to be an issue. I mean, have you guys started to think about how you tackle that?
Yeah, we have. We're kind of in constant conversation with our public works folks and trying to navigate. Sometimes maybe us in community development or planning maybe have some different priorities and vision than maybe some folks in public works, and you just try to navigate that as best we can. We are just had an RFP close, and there'll be a project starting kind of near our Southtown area where there'll be a increasing sewer capacity there. So we are starting to get some projects, and we implemented a sewer availability charge or SAC fee, which I know can also is kind of a double-edged sword because we're obviously increasing fees, which can be a barrier, but also like we need funding to build stuff. And so we're also continuing to lobby the state to offer more funding for this kind of infrastructure question. So yeah, it has been part of conversation, and it's just kind of a continued work in progress.
Right. And what I hear in what you're describing is like, it's actually not just our team, it's public works, right? It's like you're kind of, the team actually starts to expand. And my hunch is, right, even though we might have different perspective or different priorities in terms of the projects we're trying to accomplish in our city, or in our it's like to create that alignment or understanding of the problem and the problems that we're trying to solve. And it's not just us, this, on the policy side of things, there's other people that, and other maybe internal stakeholders or partners within the city that are part of that project team, right? So it's cool to see that. It's like it's all of these they could be done in isolation, but they're gonna probably be more effective when you're including others in it. So I think I'm excited to hear more about that as that unfolds, Dakota. So Max mentioned natural resource constraints make it difficult to increase density in Hugo, even though the demand is there. Yeah, and I think let's see, Elizabeth responded, the Anoka Sandplain constraints have become entirely unworkable as of late. Need more consistent and clear expectations on DNR regulations and rare plant takings. Right. So yeah, I mean, to that point, Elizabeth, and maybe Max too, who helps, like, who are some of the other, like, I guess, thought partners? I mean, I hear the DNR, is like all of a sudden now maybe more in the conversation. Max, how have you started to maybe tackle this in Hugo, to address that constraint? Like, how does that make you think about what's next or how to approach it different? Really curious.
Well, I'd say what's probably more the issue in Hugo is we have a lot of wetlands and a lot of floodplain and high water table and such, which, limits the amount of buildable area you might have on any given parcel, especially at kind of the edge of development where you might have larger parcels that, would be really good for development if it weren't wet. And that sort of limits the options there where you might have smaller areas of buildable area. The only thing that a developer could do to make a project work there is something like that's probably higher density, which our community and our planning commission and city council might not be ready for yet. And so there's kind of a work of trying to get us there where we can have something other than your large lot single family development come through. And that's part of what we're doing with our zoning code project as well, is trying to incentivize a product type that might be able to accommodate some of these parcels more, but also that the community is a bit more comfortable with.
That, yeah, you're literally talking about like physical constraints, right? Like you're not going to destroy this wetland
right.
to build, cover it, pave over it and build housing like that. That's music to my ears that, that we're just not trying to do that. But also, like, what you're talking about is like, okay, how might we, or what kind of incentives could we create so that a developer could potentially make that smaller buildable area feasible to actually build housing, right? And that could look a lot of different ways, and also in a way that meets the desires, the appetite of city council and residents, and yeah, it's a lot of factors. So, but again, I like that you're thinking about, again, the solutions beyond just, we're just changing our zoning code, for example.
I think a little bit more to the Anoka Sandplain situation.
Yeah.
Since it's like the entire life of those of us that are in the Anoka Sandplain. We have a lot of rare plants there, like not rare at all at this point, but they are classified as rare plants, and the DNR continues to expand the scope of when they are able to regulate those. So it used to just be if you had a wetland impact, but now it's if you're asking for a dewatering permit, which is essentially any time that you have a development that involves extending utilities, even just like adding services to existing utilities. Which like, and then it's, the goalposts keep changing as to like, can you impact this plant? Well, you could last year, but now you can't. Now they're saying, no, you can't get a takings permit for that. And so it's just like a lot less predictable than wetland regulation with WACA, where like we sort of like, it creates challenges, but like there has been this like collaborative process to establish rules that went through a rulemaking process that like is the same all the time, and developers and cities can plan around that, where we just keep having developments that like get close and then they're like, oh well crap, no, we can't do that anymore, which just really increases the pre-development costs and I think discourages a lot of development. And I know that Rice Creek and Coon Creek watershed districts are both trying to lobby to get change in this way. But I don't think it's gaining any traction, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're making another, I think, really good point. And that's, again, solution wise, it's like, okay, there's actually multiple, whether it's city, county type of partnerships that are like trying to elevate this conversation to the level of legislature to affect change there, and trying to collaborate with the DNR and understand like, hey, if you move the goalposts, right, you make it really hard for us to solve the housing issue. So it's yeah, I'm is anybody else, I mean, the region is diverse in terms of the natural resources here. Is anybody else like bumping into challenges with, like, say, the DNR, for example? I mean, Max, I'm going to go ahead and just throw you in that group as well. Are there others that have kind of bumped up against that sort of barrier? Or even physical constraints is another one. I don't imagine you're alone. There's 180 some odd cities in the region. So, but that's a really unique case. And again, just an example of thinking beyond the policy to like what would get in the way of real housing being preserved or developed in our community by not, by having this policy in place. And these are really good examples. So thank you for sharing those. Yeah, Jake also mentioning the just tree preservation. So this is another one, right? Like, what is your city's policy around trees? And has that been revisited? And is that, is that a simple one, potentially a simple one that could be addressed, and that could be utilized for this, that can be used to apply for these grant funds. So I'm going to move us on. Appreciate y'all chiming in and hopefully just like hearing from others and kind of what they're going through and what they're prioritizing and how they're trying to address it, and thinking beyond like just the policy or program itself to, solving bigger issues. And you start to hear like state level kind of conversations being a part of that solution. So that I'm intrigued by that. Olivia, take us
Yeah,
home.
absolutely. No, thank you. And thank you for the lively discussion, both Chris recapping everything and folks contributing in the chat. You can actually go ahead and send it to the next slide. It'll kind of cover what I want to talk about. So as we've been saying all along, that we want to be a resource for you, whether that's connecting you with folks that have similar issues, concerns, constraints, whether that's accessing the grant funds that we have available, whether that's some of the tools that are going to be put out as a part of the PlanIt and larger comprehensive planning process. Please feel free anytime to set up time to chat, attend other sessions, things like that. So we have some important links here, and I know Sama will go over this in just a moment, that these will be available after the recording. But take a peek at the Livable Communities Grant website, both to learn more about the policy and affordable housing program development that we talked about today, as well as all of our other grant opportunities. Information has been updated, and like I said, much of it is the same, but there's been a few improvements made as a part of this grant cycle for 2026. You can schedule a meeting with a program coordinator like Chris or myself or any of our other team members to talk through truly like a brainstorming process for project ideas, or if you've got a plan ready to go and just want to kind of get some confirmation or assistance with the application, I'm happy to do that. We really encourage folks to like take a look at who's in the room today and connect maybe with a peer community, a county, someone that you heard from today, if something resonates with you or there's similarities in your community. Expect to hear from one of us. We really appreciate your feedback, and we want to be able to continue the conversation and see how we can be a best of resource. So we will hopefully connect with y'all. And just generally speaking, if you want to stay in the loop on Livable Communities, maybe if you're someone new and some of this was new information, we really encourage you to sign up for email updates through the Livable Communities Act grant programs, specifically through community development. I know folks are getting all of the PlanIt emails as well, but Met Council is really in a kind of an era of a lot of technical assistance and resources. So we really encourage folks to be on those email updates to get as many access to as many resources as possible. I will, at this point, Chris and our contact information is here again, or you can reach us through any of those links we've shared. And I will turn it back over to our moderator, Sama, to wrap us up.
Well, thank you, Olivia and Chris, for your wonderful and interactive presentation. It looks like all of our questions were answered, but feel free to leave any more questions in the chat. But with that, thank you all for joining today's webinar. We will be sending the recording, transcript, and an FAQ document. And if you dropped a question in the Q&A and we could not cover it live, we will answer those themes in the follow-up, but it does look like everything was covered. There will be more PlanIt events coming up here in 2026. You can find a schedule of upcoming events in a link we will drop in the chat. And finally, it would be greatly appreciated if you can also complete this short survey that we'll be dropping in the chat. Your feedback will help improve PlanIt events in the future. Thank you again, and we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.